Hi, I'm Diana Montfort, the world's first transgender television journalist. Born male, became female, and anyway. But we're going to talk about what happens when communities coalesce. United we stand, divided we fall. Especially if you're a trans person. My guests are well-known transgender activist, Ms. Ceyenne Doroshow. Why don't you introduce yourselves?
I am Mohamed Amin, founder and executive director of the Caribbean Equality Project, and we are a nonprofit LGBTQ educational agency in New York City that empowers Caribbean LGBTQ voices.
And hi, I'm Melissa Broudo. I'm an attorney and co-director and co-founder of the Sharmis Outlaw Advocacy and Rights Institute, or SOAR Institute, and we are a policy and advocacy and community support organization for sex workers and survivors of human trafficking.
Okay.
And I am the founder of GLITZ that does continental, national, and global outreach for sustainable living for community.
Okay, great. Gee, I feel so unaccomplished. Okay, so anyway, on that note, I can make a good dessert. Anyway, so now, trans people often have to be sex workers because they have no other way to make a living, often run up against entrenched attitudes dealing with their nationality of origin and their heritage, often run into racism, run into all sorts of things. I don't know. Okay, let's start with Melissa. When a trans person comes to you and says, you know, I was just standing on the corner. Here's a case that we actually did have. Many years ago, circa 1999, I was a member of the Gender Identity Project at the center. And a girl, as we call them, a trans woman, was by the center, and a policeman called her over. She was a woman of color, and you may know this case, and said to her, what time is it? And she looked at her watch, and he said, you're under arrest. And she said, for what? He said, you know, sex working and solicitation, whatever it is. They took her off to Rikers. She was there for 6 days without being charged. We finally got her out. She was obviously exceedingly traumatized and damaged by the experience, no doubt by design. I'm sure they made sure that she was in the general population and had a really rough time. Whatever happened to protective custody?
Right.
Which can also be called solitary confinement.
Right.
So that is
Right.
a slippery slope.
Very much.
Someone comes to you with this story, what would you do?
Well, the story that you just described,
Which is true, by the way.
right, it happens all the time.
Very
It
common.
happens all the time. It's walking while trans,
Yeah.
right?
Living while trans.
Living while
yeah.
trans. And, you know, in certain communities where there are especially trans women of color, right, if you look at Jackson Heights, right, with
Yes.
trans Latino women, right, where there's a very...
Well, there's a huge mix of, yeah.
Totally. You know, we hear stories all the time. I walked out of my apartment to go down and get milk, and I was stopped and arrested for loitering for the purpose of engaging in a prostitution offense or prostitution, right? And it's interesting that you bring up that story, that situation now, because we are hoping to really get rid of the crime of loitering for the purpose of prostitution.
Well, and also, you know, being a prostitute is not illegal. They have to catch one in the act of prostitution. But that law somehow never drifts down to the patrol people.
Right.
on
And
the
the
beat.
problem with loitering, which is Penal Law 24037, loitering for the purpose of engaging in prostitution, it's a thought crime.
And
Right,
it's
we
very
believe-
subjective.
Totally. You look like a prostitute. You're dressing like a prostitute. You are a person of color. You are trans. You're in the wrong neighborhood. You're wearing the wrong outfit.
You have no visible means of support.
Right.
Hello?
What the NYPD
Right.
is also doing is they're searching trans women purses, and if they find a condom or a lube in their bag,
I thought that
Yeah.
was illegal. I thought that had changed.
It is
But it is-
illegal,
but they're
but
still doing it.
the police. So the police will use you against your own self against you and not charge you for that. Yes, that's the material they're saying you did this with, but when you're charged, you're actually charged. It's a whole different charge.
So any trans woman caught carrying one condom in her purse to avoid getting a venereal disease will be charged with prostitution for
Or
carrying
could
a
be.
condom.
Could be.
Could
Well,
be.
And now in New York City, thankfully, after a lot of work of many advocates and organizations, that practice has thankfully
Died.
subsided. But it still can be used as evidence, right? It's generally not been in New York City. And New York City definitely is on the forefront. At least the prosecutors are more on the forefront of really ensuring as much as they can within, again, the construct of our criminal injustice
But now we're
system.
being prosecuted because someone thinks we're a prostitute. You don't necessarily have to be out working. Your neighbor could actually say, or call the police department and say, my neighbor is one of them, and I want them. It happened to me. It happened to me a couple of years ago. My landlord, none of her fucking business if she really did her homework. I was actually running back and forth to the hospital, but never took the time to see the IV bag I had and the nurses visiting me. I was working. I was sick off my ass. I was going through treatment. And, of course, I had gentlemen callers, and that led to, and this is just common thought. A couple of weeks ago, an undercover knocked on my door and said that my house was under surveillance.
For what? Excuse me.
That's my sentiment exactly. Well, I hope they see what they want to see. I'm never home.
Is this because you're a person of color?
Probably because I'm trans. Forget the person of color. I live in a neighborhood where everybody's brown.
Because I was going to say, I had trouble with my landlord. They didn't think I was a prostitute, but they did want to get me out of my rent-stabilized apartment on the Upper East Side.
Wish I had that.
Excuse me. I called them and I said, hello, I'm transgender. I do a television show, and I'm an elected official, which I was. I was a judicial delegate at the time. And I'm going to sue the crap out of you people. How do you like that? I haven't been bothered since, and I damn well better not be. So, I mean, sometimes being trans can be used to your advantage.
For a white girl.
Yes.
It's a big difference for a
Very
black
different for a
girl.
person of
It's
color.
a whole different, your trans life is different from my trans life. My $2,800 a month rent is way too much. But the peace of mind to live in my community,
Right.
we were talking about housing and what it would look like for Caribbean Alliance, Caribbean Equality and Glitz to have our own housing. Because we are the demographic.
But that would be very dangerous, because if you're all concentrated in one place, some very
They're all
rude
in the
adolescent
Bronx.
boys might decide, hey, let's set fire to where the tranny whores live.
I
Yeah.
have been in
You
that
know?
neighborhood for 9 years. I don't
Yeah,
see.
no, I disagree, because Richmond Hill, it's essentially it is a really very safe community.
It's a family
It's
oriented
a
place.
family-oriented community. There is a large Guyanese, Trinidadian, Jamaican population. A lot of our work centers around educating folks on the rights of LGBTQ people, because a lot of this population is either immigrants coming from the Caribbean who doesn't necessarily know the laws and the human rights laws in New York
exactly.
City. So our job as the Caribbean Equality Project
And
Glitz,
many immigrants from the Caribbean come here because they are trans or gay and
Yeah, they
can't
just
live
trying
where
to
they
be
live.
safe.
Yeah,
They're trying to be
yeah.
safe. They're just filing for asylum, trying to be safe. And a lot of the trans folks and the LGBTQ Caribbean folks are reaching out to us to provide them a referral to services, whether it's immigration, whether it's housing, whether it's in jobs, employment,
Sure.
and just support, just support. Period. So we've talked about this, and we do feel like Southeast Queens, Richmond Hill, a safe space
It's a
could
safe
be.
narrative.
We could create a safe
Why
space
would
for
I-
trans people.
The system itself is designed to put. I see most of the trans women shifted off to the Bronx in a place that's not so safe. High drug, high crime values. This is
The
a
problem is that most non-trans people think trans people are part of the problem, on a par with people
The
who
problem-
are,
The bigger
take
problem
drugs and other things.
is that there are no places that would accept us but these places. So they're not. In my neighborhood, it was very hard for me to get a place. You were part of the process. Extremely hard.
Excuse me, can you help trans people get apartments?
No,
Well,
that's what I do.
what I did with Ceyenne, because of our, we've
Yeah.
been working together for 9 years. I went with her to
witness it.
the with the realtor to look at apartments.
But he probably thought you were the one renting it.
No,
They
this was very
knew.
transparent. This was like, I deliberately wanted her to see this process.
Did you say, and this is my attorney,
No.
Ms. Broudo? Bruno?
Broudo. No.
Yeah, I think we, it just
and
even
we
by
wind
me
it up
being there,
happening in
right?
the end, but the bigger case was for her to see how very awful this was.
I'm sure she had a good idea dealing with trans people a lot.
Until you're actually hit with it, you can only estimate what comes out of people's
Right.
mouths and the places they would show.
But I think that the privilege within that scenario that I want to acknowledge is the fact that Melissa was there as a cisgender white woman assisting a trans woman getting housing.
Yeah.
And that realtor probably just looked at Ceyenne as, okay, you're going to be renting here, okay, fine. But wow, you have a white cisgender friend. Oh, you must be important. And unfortunately...
No, she knew that from the start.
And,
Right.
and that's even
She
great,
knew that
because that's
from-
great.
yeah.
And that's a privilege for you, Ceyenne, because a lot of trans people of color
Don't have
have
I
a white
know.
counterpart to go with them
know.
to be interviewed.
Now-
They won't even get an interview.
Now,
I know.
here's what she offered me in the beginning. Far Rockaway, a place where a trans girl would die on the way to the subway.
Yeah.
That was the first set of apartments. Oh, you would be better off in Far Rockaway. What?
Better off.
Yeah. And I'm like, no, sweetie, I'm going to stay right here. It's so ironic, but this lady that wanted me to live in Far Rockaway lives 6 houses from me.
But
She'd
I
rather
actually-
be in Far Rockaway than next door to
I
her.
lived in Far Rockaway for a couple of years. When my parents first came to New York in '96, my family lived in Far Rockaway, and some still do. So I'm very familiar with Far Rockaway. It is another small immigrant community.
Don't you have like
It's-
a great amusement park there or something?
We used to.
Yeah, we use that anymore. But it's also very, it's a large African American population. Now they're developing, Senator Sanders actually got
The
millions of
Rockaways
dollars to
are
develop the
gentrifying.
Rockaway. It's becoming
But
a
is
little bit more gentrified.
gentrification good, or will it displace people like
Well, it
Ceyenne?
is. Right now, it is displacing folks. It's displacing folks in Far Rockaway who've been lived there for 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And people are knocking on their doors.
And quote unquote affordable rent tend to be
and-
like $3,500 a month,
Correct.
which as we film this is quite exorbitant.
Yeah.
Right. But-
Do the police have a quota when it comes to arresting people?
That's information that the police would never share.
But
You know,
it would
I-
seem to be, because if they just go after trans women, and it's usually
Right.
trans women,
Yeah.
just out of nowhere, it would seem that we'd better get a few more because we're quitting soon.
Sure.
Well-
And I mean, I think that what has shifted so strongly in the last couple of years around prostitution arrests is there's been a decrease. Definitely in Manhattan. That's partially gentrification, as we've
Yeah.
just talked about, but it's also partially a shift of the narrative from prostitution to human trafficking, which is a double-edged sword. I mean, right, there's positives to that in the sense that there's less of a focus on let's arrest and punish all of the workers, but then there's of course the other side of it, which is a savior complex, right? That everyone doing prostitution must be a victim, which is not true. I'll take it if it means it's going to get my client off, but it's just as a sort of a
Many
narrative. It's
prostitutes
not true.
enjoy the independence and other
Definitely.
perks
once
of that business.
Once they have you in this traffic situation or housing, you're further trafficked. You're now being pimped
Is this
by
like a
the
home for
system.
unwed mothers from
Well,
1900? that
it's
kind
sort of
thing?
because you're now being pimped to tell your story for them.
Right.
And here it comes at a bigger price. You're not getting paid. You're not getting feed. You're not getting the mental health
But
to
dear,
back you up.
can live a decent life, and
And we
get
can
you,
pray for you.
and we'll get you a nice job, scrubbing floors,
Right. And that's the thing.
and you'll have your self-respect. Now scrub that floor, bitch.
I
Yeah.
remember when Ceyenne and I first connected, one of the first things she said to me, I may need your help. And she was telling me how someone from our community that we live in actually outed her to her landlord as a trans person. And the landlord then started to send her all types of transphobic and hate mail through emails.
Oh, yeah.
And
Shall I tell you what happened in my building?
we would love to hear it.
Well, I shouldn't give my address. It's on East 88th Street. This man, who is an accountant, who lived downstairs, found out that I was trans, his girlfriend put a truly vicious letter. Just because a guy has a boob job doesn't make him a woman. She plastered these all over the building. Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes. I tore them down, wrote a big letter myself saying, kindly do not use hate speech. It is not allowed in this building. The police will be notified. Is this not incredible?
And that's 86th Street.
88.
86th.
And by the way, this ain't a boob job. They're real. Okay. You were
Yes,
saying.
yes. That's kind of the sad thing. I needed Mohamed because I needed somebody to witness what was actually happening. That this man who turned me on to this realtor also, so it was kind of get her in and get her out. But I'm not going anywhere. I got a 3-year lease. You're a pig, clearly. But here's a man that's connected to politics in our neighborhood. When I went to him and said, listen, I need an apartment, said, I know a realtor. The realtor set me up with this apartment. But in the emails, it started to speak a language I never spoke. This man never met me face to face. We've never met each other.
The politician?
No, the landlord.
Oh.
So how could you have a definition of me being trans?
Yeah.
And then it made sense. And I called the realtor, and the realtor said, oh, you know such and such. And I said, oh.
In other words, the politician outed you to the...
Well, he's not a politician. He's just he's a local community organizer. He also
was a councilman, wasn't he? Yeah,
sure.
he was a councilman.
Would you like to mention his
No.
name?
He also
He's
went
not
on
that
Facebook.
important.
He also went on Facebook and he was leaving a lot of anti-LGBTQ comments on different posts.
Why not tell his name?
That I think right now we have a case with the Commission on Human Rights against him, so we're trying to make sure we protect that.
No,
case.
I'm into like outing rats, you know.
Yeah, no, we are too, but we're doing it with we're doing it the right way to make sure like what they're doing, they know it's against the law and it's also against our rights. They're violating our rights as community members.
None of this behavior should be allowed. It's ironic. With all of this GLBT stuff going on, with trans women being murdered all around the world, the police are being trained 25 hours a year. 25 hours a year sensitivity training, when clearly you need about 500 hours.
Because I used to go to the 6th precinct and do sensitivity
and
training.
we need to be the one.
cops.
Yeah, we need to be doing the training.
Yeah, but they're very polite when you're there.
Oh,
you know?
I'm so sure. But that training...
Right this way, ma'am.
That training
there are always
is...
some other air quotes around
That
that
training
ma'am, but
is
okay.
outdated and based on a California model. What does that speak for a black trans woman in New York City? You damn sure can't talk for a black trans woman in New York City to the police about what it is to be Caribbean black, maybe a sex worker, maybe just trying to live. And that's a whole different language. We don't have that. We don't have that, and the police are not being taught the right lessons. Because if there was a narrative, a cop wouldn't see it as such a thing to prey on a trans woman. But we're easy target, and we're disposable. And we might be black, so that's a bigger... I think it's just dealing with an area they don't know that's ignorant.
In addition to sensitivity training, there's also a cultural component that needs to be added. A lot of New York City is very diverse. We live in Queens. Queens is the most diverse borough in New York City.
I know.
And there's so many different cultures and so many different languages, and our officers need to be culturally trained when they're responding to violence, and they need to also know if a cultural hate speech was used in that incident.
Yes, but
that
often
needs to be classified
the
as a
police
hate
will
speech.
say yes to all the sensitivity training.
Right.
Take it, be very polite. And then when they go out, they get this macho power urge, and they feel like abusing someone because maybe they had a fight with a girlfriend this morning, or maybe their trousers are too tight and they're uncomfortable. They just want to cause problems to those who are defenseless. There's a personality type that becomes a police officer. No offense, police officers, but it can be quite domineering and abusive. That is why they would become police officers.
Well, it's that directly abuse to our community. It's they're not protecting us, especially LGBTQ folks. If you're responding, if someone is calling you saying they've been attacked, you should be competent. You should be trained to know in what situation you need to call the hate crimes unit. If this person was attacked with a Caribbean hate slur, you need to know what that hate slur means and how it's equivalent to an American hate
I can tell you
speech.
something else. Right here in this studio, about 2 months ago, this woman got in my face, insulted me, and laughed at me on the basis of being trans. I went into the office and said, I'm calling the police and signing a complaint against this woman. Oh, don't do that. Oh, please don't do that. Oh, don't do that. That's what this place said. Then I was punished for threatening to call the police by someone here at MNN, and I had to threaten to sue and go on National Public Radio, NPR, to talk about this and name names. And that suddenly smoothed everything over.
Right.
But I mean, apparently they think that trans people are just natural victims. And they find it extremely insolent when trans people defend themselves. Like, you're not being a good girl. You don't understand you're low on the food chain and you're supposed to take the crap.
Right.
They actually say it. They actually, the
Right.
cop had told me, which was totally wrong, the night that I was arrested, you had 9 arrests. You should know this. For sex work, I just got my ass handed to me in a fucking plate. And you're going to tell me you're a pig. And it's just common.
And it
They-
happens with sex work. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, with trans women and trans
So,
women
but
of
you're
color,
going to
but
let me
sex
work in
workers
your
as
corporate
well.
America? I don't think so.
Right.
Well, yes and no. I
Right.
used to be a dominatrix, and I put myself at the highest economic level because I'd read that Elizabeth Arden survived the Depression by pricing her cosmetics high. So I thought, I'll price my whipping high. So I knew very powerful men.
Yeah.
So if I'd ever had any problem, I would have picked up the phone and said,
Yeah.
so Mike Bloomberg, listen. No, I'm kidding. But I mean, you know, and I would have, that was a joke. I did not have
Yeah.
Bloomberg as a client. But I would presumably have managed to save myself.
Right. Right.
Because I know too much.
Well, and it's also, it goes back to, the sort of initial topic of allyship and partnering. And
It's also very racist because I'm white and I can price myself high as a dominatrix, whereas a woman of color,
Can price herself high. Wrong. Oh, yeah, baby. Dominatrix is the one area where you can go high.
yes, but that is because some
That's
white men
different.
enjoy submitting to women of color as a further degradation.
And also, it's just another means, it's a niche market. So that just happens to be one of the better ones. If the girls are
You
smart.
think I'm stupid?
No, I mean, if you're a black girl doing
A white girl,
DM
whatever.
work, it's a better marketing tool. It's a less
Ladies, you don't even have to take off your clothes. They
yeah,
just crawl around
it's a
and you
less
get paid a fortune.
dangerous
legal.
situation.
Yeah, a judge in 1992 ruled it was theater. A judge in
exactly,
Brooklyn.
it's fantasy.
It's
It's
art.
performance.
It's art.
In New York State. It does
Not in
vary
New Jersey,
from
we
state to
found out.
state.
That's
Not in
why I
New
was
Jersey, but
arrested
in
in
New
New
York
Jersey.
State, fetish work, as long as there is no genital touching, is legal.
But they are, however, allowed to masturbate themselves. I mean,
Right, as long as there's no touching of someone
exactly.
else's genitalia.
And make sure he gets naked first, because cops don't get naked. Okay, so they shower in their uniforms.
sometimes they
It's
do.
scary, really, with shoes on. It's awful, and their little hats. Yes.
But no, I think it goes so much back to, how do we utilize our various identities and the various, I mean, I have a lot of privilege,
That's
obviously.
but because you're
And
an ambassador
Right.
for communities of color and sex workers, your privilege bleeds onto them, and they probably think what you said earlier. Well, if she has this nice, lovely white woman with her who's well educated, obviously she can't be as bad as we think she is. So let her go.
Right.
And besides, you never know. She might be the mayor's daughter, and she might get us into trouble. So we'll have to let her friend go.
Well, it was actually so funny in that instance. I had mentioned something about needing, like, there was maybe a Jewish holiday coming up or something. I said
Something that's
about being-
indisputably Caucasian. Yes.
about being Jewish, and I remember the woman said that I think her husband had a Jewish boss. So that
Yeah.
also, in that moment, upped me maybe
Exactly.
even
Yes.
in a,
It made you more relatable.
Ever more Caucasian.
right,
Yes.
right. Yeah, so it was like, it
And
was
I
sort
think
of a
also
funny,
one of the places we seen had the
funny.
little Jewish thing by the door.
yeah.
And when
Yeah,
we were
yeah,
going
yeah.
in to look at one of the houses.
The mezuzah.
Yeah. And we were going in to look at the houses, and Mel was like,
Well, it's just funny, right? Because I guess for, in that particular
Yeah.
instance, right, like the Jewishness
Yeah.
signaled economic stability,
Exactly.
which again can
Also,
be
and a
it-
certain
as a-
well-connected importance in the
also,
world.
Right.
it was toxic trying to find a house that could accommodate what I was looking for in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
So that was my
Why
challenge.
was it toxic?
Because it's Indian culture. This is ignorance tagged on to not financial. I could afford it. I could afford
But
it.
you have to prove up,
It's
down, and
the-
sideways
yeah,
that you
it's
can
the-
afford it
it's-
legally.
Yeah.
No, legally.
That you're not getting
It's
it.
the
you know.
ignorance of the landlord seeing a trans woman
Yeah.
come in. You're literally from another country challenged by far worse. But me being trans is what bothers you.
Yeah.
You're coming from a
Yeah.
place where the dirt on the ground is horrible and the economy is even worse.
That's
But
Guyana?
you're Guyana. But you're judging me for just being me and my skin and my truth.
Well, I think one of the things that really brought all of us together, it's experiences like that, right? Because a lot of our intersectionality plays a major role in what we do in New York City, whether it's the work with GLITZ or Caribbean Equality
But there's a
Project
lot
or
of lack of
SOAR.
understanding among the groups. That's
But this
the
is why
Around all
we
of them.
exist. But it's
Yeah.
also why we exist. We exist to educate our community. You know, we don't want to demonize our Caribbean people. We want to educate our Caribbean people. We
Well, it's
wanna-
ignorance,
Empower.
not malevolence.
well, it's in terms of ignorance. You cannot weed out ignorance with more ignorance. You
Right,
have to
exactly,
educate. Right? You have
exactly.
to educate.
You have
Sure.
to smile.
And you have, and this is what we do. A lot of our work centers around educating our people because right now in New York City, communities of color are being attacked.
Well,
right?
speaking of which, how can people contact you since we're
They
out
can
of
contact the Caribbean Equality Project at CaribbeanEqualityProject.org or on Facebook. I am Mohamed Q. You can find me on Facebook if you need any type of information on Caribbean LGBTQ activism in New York City.
Melissa, how can they contact
They
you?
can contact the SOAR Institute on our website, www.soarinstitute.org, or info@soarinstitute.org. And I'm Melissa Sontag Broudo. You can also find me online.
How can they contact
Ceyenne Doroshow, glitzink.org. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram.
And that's Cayenne, spelled like the pepper.
Yes, it
And
is.
Doroshow, like the
Spicy.
famous Jack Doroshow, who's one of your mentors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, hi, Jack. Love you.
She's gone.
She left? She died?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we'll talk.
Okay. Well, you just saw it here first, folks.
Oh, she heard you.
No, I'm sure she did, but picture of shock here. Okay, anyway, on that shocking note, I'm Diana Montfort. You can contact me by watching the show every week. Anyway, just watch and be happy. And you know, we address trans concerns most of the time. Sometimes other concerns, but mainly trans concerns. Anyway, I'm Diana Montfort. This has been the Diana Montfort Show. I love you a lot, and I strongly urge you, wherever you're watching this show, there will always be pro bono attorneys who will help LGBTQ people. Melissa's one of them,
Caribbean Equality Project.
is another, but wherever you're watching this, someone somewhere is a right-thinking, decent person who will help you. You know, they can't all be monsters. Someone will help. Anyway, I love you a lot, and hey, take real good care of yourself, and I'll see you next time. Let's all say bye.
Thank you for having us, Diana.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
My
Thank you very
pleasure.
much.
Love
And connect
you.
with us.
Yes.
Definitely.
Jack
Yes.
Doroshow died?
Yes. The day before Thanksgiving. The
Oh my
Friday
Really
before
recent.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yeah, it broke my heart.
Well, he was like
The
75.
memorial's in March.
Oh, I'd love to go. He
The
was great.
memorial's in March. I'll
Have you seen the Queen, anyone?
yes, of course, over and over again. Over and over. But they're going to see it for the first time.
I saw it for the first time recently, and I was 12 years old when it came out, and I was fascinated, but of course I wasn't going to go into a theater to see it because
Right.
I just wasn't. You know?
Yeah, Town Hall had fought us big time. You know, it was filmed in Town Hall.
Yeah.
Well, they wanted $22,000 to host a memorial.
Oh,
You pigs.
we should have said that
Where
on
is
the
it
air.
gonna be?
It's going to be in one of the art centers downtown.
Okay.
Yeah, a
That's
big
a
place.
terrible thing.
Yeah, that is
I
terrible.
know. So much.
That's
to
her
My stomach
contribution.
cannot
Can you
take it.
believe
I know.
it?
I'm stunned.
I'm so hungry.
I was,
I know.
but Zachary Drucker and Diana are putting
Shit, we
it.
didn't film the second. Well, I think we got it on the little round thing because all these shows go into the National LGBTQ archives.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, I mean,
Oh, that's great.
Look
Yeah.
at you.
oh, babe, come on. I'm the historian around here.
Yes.
You all
yes.
do stuff, I write it down.
I
That's my
love
role.
it. I
Yeah.
love
That's
it. Thank you
awesome.
so much.
Diana, can we take a quick
yeah, we
photo?
need a picture
Oh,
with
yeah.
you.
Hold
Hold on. Come
wait,
here. Come
I'm
here,
still
sweetie.
mic.
Come here.
I'm still mic.
Let me get your mic
Oh my
off
God.
you.
Thank you. Let me get my telly.
Let me get my fat reducing jacket here.
I'm gonna hurt you. You are not fat.
No, not at all.
I'll play. Did you see rolls?
why I got this on?
Yeah. Oh, Joe.
Under here.
Rolls of fat.
Just shove it
This is
in
not
poncho.
even a poncho. I found this for like
Where?
Hopefully not at that weird art thing
Oh.
that we
And
went
it
to.
pulls over your
With
head.
Tito.
That's beautiful.
No. Yeah, I was like, what?
What's that place called? I'm sure you've been.
$3? Give me that.
Yeah, really.
Oh, yay. There's good lighting in here, bro.
Yes, I need.
Do we want to sit and take it? Do we want to stand? How do we want to
Well,
do
we
it?
can ask some nice person out there to take our picture.
Yeah. And we won't talk about my phone because this one here.
No, we're not using your phone.
I see.
Phone's a
I
hot
knew you were coming there.
Your phone's a hot mess all the time.
Well, maybe some nice person would like to help us.
I mean, I'm so
Oh,
sore.
thank
I
you.
did way too much orange.
This
here.
lovely person will take
Thank
our
you.
picture.
I guess we could sit, right?
Should we sit?
Yes.
Okay.
We have for sure for
Thank you,
Oh,
our
yeah.
special
Thank you,
photographer.
thank you. Last week she took pictures too. She's
Oh,
an
nice.
angel.
See, you're gonna start changing your seat to the other side. See?
Yeah,
exactly.
to avoid
Hide
us. Yeah.
on Fridays.
Great. Thank you
Spend
so
3 hours in the ladies' room until we all
Yes.
leave.
You're so awesome.
Thank you. Okay.
Oh.
We look cute.
Oh, nice.
Oh, very nice.
Very nice.
We look like a
These
theater
lights
troupe.
are
Look.
just-
Yeah,
No,
the
that's
lights
great.
on
These
everything.
I'm gonna get
We
these
need
in my
these
head.
at home.
They're LEDs.
Amazing.
They're LEDs.
These
That's
are
all they.
LEDs.
Yeah.
Wow.
They used to be really hot,
I
and
need these in my
so they
bathroom.
changed it.
No,
and now
they're-
they're
Yeah, they're
cool.
great.
Such good lighting. You'll
This one is
text it to
amazing.
me.
We look like a theatrical troupe. You know?
I need that in my bathroom.
Oh my god.
Send it
Text
to me too.
me.
I will.
Yeah.
And me
Have,
too.
Yeah.
A Twitter handle?
I no, but I have a Facebook thing.
Okay.
Okay.
Twitter, no. I know.
I'm not a computer person.
I'm not
I don't know how to use one.
Not either.
Okay, that's fine.
It's dcmontfort@gmail.com.
Okay.
That's me.
Yeah.
I'm horrible.
Oh, good.
Oh,
Somebody else.
she's not so hot either.
I'm
Oh,
not
but
so hot.
good. Thank God.
I'm like
way worse
decent.
than her.
I'm not. I can't even do it.
I'm decent, but
I don't even want to.
I don't love it.
It's called like the landline. Hello.
I know.
I am horrible. They sent me a grant today, and it came with these contracts and everything. I sent it to them. That was that. As soon as I see the stuff,
like,
it literally makes me not breathe.
Yeah, my
DC
eyes glaze
Manford?
over.
DC Manford?
Montfort.
Montfort.
F-O-R-D.
Montfort.
Check my phone to make sure nothing has happened at the house.
The kids haven't eaten.
At gmail.com.
Well, yeah, exactly. His parents are over too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They're back?
Yeah, but they're going away for another 2 months. I'm like, how could you leave me?
Well, this is it's like really anticlimactic. It's like after the party, because now there's
Right.
nothing after this.
Right.
Now I'm here until midnight putting this in the system, so there is no, like, we don't, like, throw confetti and bring in a cake or anything.
Oh, Hannah was texting me.
Hannah, my Hannah Weinstein? Yes!
I'll do a quick photo with you.
Okay.
Oh, I can take it.
Oh, could you?
Sure, of course.
I miss my Hannah,
I
and I
love
need one too,
Hannah.
Diana, before you.
And why don't we
Of
all take
course, of
individual
course.
ones?
Yeah.
Okay.